Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on building your innovation engine. It's great to see you on the call today. I hope you had a good bank holiday if you're in the UK, and if you're not in the UK, I hope you had a good Monday yesterday. So yeah, as I say, welcome to the webinar. I'm joined by Zach Curtis from the Innovation Beehive. Zach, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yes, hello everybody, and welcome to midway through the week. So my name is Zach Curtis. I'm the Capability Director with the Innovation Beehive. We're talking about the engine today, as Joe's going to mention, but I've just realized I've got the innovation engine right behind my head. I've just realized part of my engine, Joe, is having a series of post-it notes to help my structure for the day.
Absolutely, and we'll talk all about structure as we go through the webinar today. But for those of you who don't know us, the Innovation Beehive exists to accelerate the potential of organizations, of people, of leaders, of teams, and of course, of ideas. So the engine is really about taking ideas from the kind of nascent idea that first appears, the nascent thought, and taking it right through to implementation. So we're going to give you some tools, tips, and techniques for doing that in the webinar today. But before we get into that, we want you to use your fingers, exercise those muscles in your fingers, and type into the chat why you think process and structure is important in innovation. And as you're typing, I'm just going to share a little bit about where we've been so far. So for those of you who joined previous webinars, we've already talked about creating an innovation direction, and that's about having a really clear point of action, a real clear sense of purpose and direction to your innovation efforts, so that people know that when they're coming up with ideas, they're coming up with ideas that matter and will make a difference. We also talked about building an environment for innovation. So that's the culture, the leadership, and the feeling that goes into the innovation team. And today we're talking about processes and structures, but also about the behaviors that go alongside those. So thinking of all of that, why would you say that process and structure is important in innovation? Why is that a key part of the innovation ecosystem?
We've had some comments coming in already, Joe. We've got here to give a clear set of instructions to help to be creative. Okay, yes, I agree. Structure and process will give us, I guess, some sort of instruction on how to do it. We've also had keeping ahead of the competition. If you could let us know a bit more about what that means, that would be great. We've had to set expectations for how innovation is done. That's interesting. I quite like that thing about setting expectations.
Absolutely, I really like that. And just to build on that point about keeping ahead of the competition, for me, you know, an engine is all about keeping up the pace. So having the structures and processes in place means that, you know, you can come up with ideas, but you can also get them to do something more quickly. You can get them to market, or you can action them, or at least you can prototype them much more quickly and much more efficiently and cheaply than maybe your competitors who don't have a rigorous innovation process in place. Are there any other comments coming through, Zach?
Yeah. I think it's a similar one to keeping ahead of my. I assume if I'm wrong, let me know. To keep ahead of the curve, I assume that's similar to the previous comment of keeping ahead of my competition.
Yeah, but I guess there's also a piece in there around you know, having a structure and a process and maybe behaviors in place that actually encourage and enforce and enable your people to look outside and to keep ahead of the kind of the industry curve almost. So I mean, I don't know, maybe the person is referring to the disruption curve, where if you're not the leader or close to the leaders, you're going to fall behind, and ultimately you're going to get disrupted out of existence. So maybe that's what they're thinking there, and absolutely having a structure is really important for that. And when you think of it in those terms, the stakes are actually quite high. We've also had another comment come through: to get stakeholders to continue to support us, they do need to know the direction of travel. Absolutely, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, actually, to make clear to people the roadmap for innovation in your organization is really important, so that they know the journey that you're going to go on when they start investing in the idea, both in time and money and resource, but also they know where you've been, so they can have confidence in the ideas that are being generated and that they're being asked to back. And also, just to add, that the person who commented that has added, without a structure, you can get distracted by the latest shiny thing. Absolutely. And the key thing about innovation without action is not really innovation. It's just, well, not just, but it's just creativity. You know, creativity is a good thing in and of itself, but within a business context, there needs to be action. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Really, really useful. So again, those of you who've been on previous webinars will have seen the next slide before. The innovation ecosystem, a lot of what we talk about talks about the battleground for leadership. So it talks about the mindset and the behaviors. You know, setting a clear direction instills in people a mindset of a goal to aim for, so they know what they're heading for. The innovation environment builds the culture and the behaviors and the whole mindset in the team. When it comes to building the engine, it is important to look after and take care of as a leader. It's important to look after the tangible zone, the structures and the processes. And in the next webinar, when we talk about the enablers, we'll be thinking about capability and physical environment. But actually, the structure and processes are vital to leading innovation, because without those, if you only have the mindset and behaviors, you're going to excite people, but nothing is going to get done. So today we're predominantly thinking about the tangible zone of leadership, but of course we are still going to be thinking about the behaviors that actually enable those structures to work effectively. And we've been talking a lot over the last few months about what people need and expect from their leaders in our current climate and probably going forward. This is our hunch and based on our research. That people in organizations are going to be looking for these 5 things from their leaders. They're going to be looking for higher levels of trust in their leaders, but also trust from their leaders. So there's a piece around empowerment, and actually putting structures in place creates a gilded cage in which people can feel trusted and can feel empowered to get on with the job in hand. And leaders can know that they can trust the organization because you've put a structure and a process in place to enable people to follow the right process and deliver results. Credibility is important. So the whole of the innovation ecosystem builds credibility. As that comment that came through earlier said, if you've got a structure in place, you're able to speak to your stakeholders about the journey that you're on and the journey that you're going to be on and the journey that you've been on, which gives credibility to the ideas that come out of it. But also as a leader, if you start to talk in woolly terms about creativity and innovation and don't have a clear process for people to follow, unless you're incredibly inspiring and charismatic, sometimes that woolliness, if you like, that intangible nature of innovation can actually get a little bit lost on people. So having the structure and the process in place can build credibility. And Zach, I can never remember if it's left brain or right brain, but which side of the brain would appreciate the structure and the process more?
Typically left.
So for left brain people in your team, having the structure and the process can really help them buy into the innovation ecosystem and the innovation process. Having compassion is really important. So, you know, we're going to be talking a little about the behaviors that build into the structures and process and the engine that you build. And part of that is around empathy and understanding and enabling and building a structure in which it is safe and comfortable for people to fail and to experiment and learn. So that's where the compassion piece comes into the engine. Stability, I mean, it goes without saying, if you have a process, you have a stable process that is replicable, and therefore there is a sense of stability when you're trying to encourage your team to be more innovative and creative. And ultimately, this hope. The great thing about a structure and a process and an engine for innovation is that it shows you what the end point is, so you know what you're working towards. So by building these structures and by building the innovation engine, you're able to bring hope in a structural way, as well as in a mindset and behavioral way, to your people so that they're able to flourish within the innovation process. So Zach, tell us a little bit about what we've identified, you know, as the innovation beehive, how the innovation beehive is tackling these 5 things that leaders need, that people need from their leaders through Leadership 4.0.
Yeah, so first a very quick bit of why. So as Joe mentioned, today is all about the engine, the 3rd element of the innovation ecosystem. We'll run through all 4 again in just a second. But the lens through which we need to look at it is through the lens of a leader. And the reason for that is we developed this tool called Leadership 4.0 before the pandemic, and it was reiterated and improved during the pandemic as a new way to lead, or a new way to think about leading. And we'll just give you a super quick, why not? Top line overview, but I know that lots of you who've attended our webinars over the last year or 18 months are well versed with the 5 elements here. So just a brief recap, leading in head, the first element you see there is focused absolutely on strategic thinking, tactics, operations. It's very much the kind of functional and return on investment end of leading. Leading in heart is all about empathy, bringing your people with you and your customers with you on a journey or through the story of your business or what it is you're trying to achieve. Leading in health is about psychological safety, well-being, and respect. How can we actually embrace everybody to come on that journey with us? And leading in habit, it's about making the practices, all of the leadership practices, consistent, habitual, but also in some way continually improving. And as we know, habits can be both perceived as negative and positive, so we want to be able to reinforce positive leadership habits as well. There's something else here as well when it comes to innovation. We need to make a habit of learning, and a habit of being okay with failure. So it's really important when we think of our engine, it's really important when we think of innovation generally, that we are okay with that as well. Also, finally, leading in history. And that's all about leaving a legacy. We can all remember, I'm sure, the one great boss or a great boss we've had in our past careers, that one who was inspiring, who encouraged us to be creative, who encouraged us to spread our wings. And leading in history is exactly about that. It's making a mark, making positive change, about thinking back on the things we've done as leaders, particularly with a view to innovation, and trying to just be proud of what we've achieved. And if you want to know more in detail, you can download the white paper on Leadership 4.0 from our website. But you can also listen to our podcast, the People Innovation Podcast, which is available on all the right platforms. Right. The innovation ecosystem. For, I think it's about 13 years now, starting with our founder, Mock O'Keefe, we've been working with some of the world's most innovative, creative, and dynamic organizations and teams. Now, we haven't just been working with them and observing them, we've been working with them, observing them, and learning from them. And we've learned over the years that there are 4 principal areas that all of these teams get right. Absolutely spot on. They have all these things in common. Now, as Joe mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, firstly, they have a very clear direction. And that was the subject of an earlier webinar that we've already done. That's the first stage. Having that clear innovation direction means that everyone is aligned to move towards that direction. The second element, the environment, is all about making sure that we create an environment which is somehow cohesive or somehow allows people to work collaboratively or somehow does more than just having the physical environment. It's also about having the mindset and behaviors in an environment, in your culture, in your organization, to allow innovation to happen effectively. That was the subject of the following webinar after the direction. And again, they're all available on YouTube for you to have a look at, and also on the podcast. Today's one is about the engine. Which we'll come on to in a second. The last one, the enablers, is all about how we actually, of course it's in the name, enable our teams to be as strong as possible when they're coming up with great ideas or when they're prototyping and testing. But today, Joe, next slide, please, the engine. Is how can we have the right processes and structures in place to be as creative as possible. One of the challenges that many innovative organizations have is they are confronted by barriers of time, barriers of money, barriers of it's not in my job description, barriers of, oh, I'm not a creative person myself. But as Joe mentioned earlier, there is a place for you in innovation, regardless of your natural thinking process, or regardless of how you view the world, or regardless of your role in the organization. Now, the engine is all about bringing those things together. But it goes beyond that as well. Let's say you've watched our previous 2 webinars and you have tried to create a strong innovation direction that you're all going to head towards. You have tried to create a great environment, a creative environment, one which allows free thinking to head towards that direction. You can't just then say for the engine, right team, off you go and have great ideas. You can't just release them into the wild and hope that they'll survive. I'm afraid we need clear structures and powerful processes so that our team comes with us. So the engine is all about creating those structures, creating those processes so that our ideas are shepherded in some way. So then we are more likely to take them to fruition and successful outcome. Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, you know, when I'm talking to clients at the Innovation Beehive about this, I talk about the idea of moving from inception to implementation. So the very first kind of nascent idea that people get in a brainstorming session or you know, a light bulb moment when they're sitting at their desk in the office or at home. But actually taking that nascent idea, it's nothing on its own. It has to go through a process to actually be implemented. Without implementation, there is no innovation in your organization. Ideas alone are valueless. It's what you do with them that makes the difference. And the engine is actually what enables you to do something with ideas. And in order to do that, you really need to be able to navigate your way. You need to know the route through the complexity of the organization, the complexity of an implementation process. You need to give people in your team and in your organization a clear pathway through. So rather than being a maze with lots of dead ends, it's a straight line that people can simply walk along. And yes, it might not be a perfectly straight road to get there, but actually, you're with them on the journey and you've given them the route through so that ultimately they can get to where they need to get to implement the ideas. But the important thing to say is that not every idea at the point of inception is going to get implemented, but it's important to take them on the journey until you have learned whether they are worth pursuing further. And you do that through a series of filters that we'll get onto in a moment as we go through the prototyping and testing. But the key point is ideas need to be taken on a clearly defined journey. And that is the essence of the innovation engine. And I guess...
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, go on, Zach. What were you going to say?
I was about to carry on the metaphor you started.
Well, feel free.
Since we're being all metaphorical and you talked about roads and navigation, let's talk about, and then we're talking about an engine, let's talk about fueling and oiling it. Right, where do we go? Let's imagine imagine a car engine. So a car engine, as you may know, consists of various structured parts which work together to help us head towards our direction, the direction we set as part of our innovation ecosystem. Those structured parts in that engine, they're specific, they're functional. We cannot, as I mentioned, just tell our teams to go off and have great ideas. We need to give them that engine to help them get there. Now, the engine in this instance, it could be a clear set of guidelines. For example, I don't know, a kickbox of innovation tools, or a creative or design process like lean or agile or design thinking or something. But even providing the engine isn't enough for that powerful innovation. We need to fuel and oil that engine so that it doesn't seize. That means really that we need particular behaviors from the team. We need a mindset to avoid some of the barriers I mentioned before so that we can come up with the right ideas at the right time. The barriers I mentioned, for example, were, I don't have the time, nothing will happen with the ideas, we don't have the budget, it's not in my job role, I'm not creative, etc., etc. We need our teams, particularly as leaders, we need our teams to understand the importance of behaviors, particularly of expansive and reductive. Now I'm thinking of it, Joe, of expansive and reductive as being quite clear behaviors that we can use in our engine. And expansive is where there are no holds barred. Our thinking and our idea generating must be as broad as possible, pushing the boundaries. Oh, I love that. Pushing the boundaries beyond what we might think plausible. That's going to help us to come up with even more creative ideas. However, reductive thinking, that's where we narrow down to something which is more achievable or more realistic. And of course, we need both of those types of behaviors for very powerful innovation. But how do we not confuse the two of them? Well, that's where signaling those behaviors becomes very important. And signaling from a couple of different angles. Signaling when we must be expansive, meaning saying when we must be expansive and when we must be reductive, particularly for us as leaders. And signaling as a leader that the team has space to be creative, signaling as a leader that they can be part of that creative process, essentially giving them permission to do it. We have to make sure that we signal by leading from the front, not just expecting the team to deliver business maximizing ideas to our door, but to make sure that we are right there in the melee leading from the front.
Thanks, Zach. So a couple of things from what Zach just said that I just want to expand on. Well, maybe expand on, I don't know. But what I love about the idea of expansive thinking and reductive thinking is you can actually visualize it like a process, like a structure. You can easily patch those behaviors and the signals that you need to send into a structure. So if you imagine a funnel coming down to a point, that's the basic structure of innovation within the innovation ecosystem. Really simple terms. You start with the expansive thinking, and then you build a process that reduces the thinking down to the idea that is going to work. And that in its simplest terms, that's a really powerful image. And if you don't take away anything else from this, take away that image of starting broad and becoming focused. And the way to do that is by using the design thinking process. This is a really powerful process that we use with clients on a wide range of projects, whether it's marketing projects or HR projects or new product development. This process works. It's the process that goes into developing apps on your mobile phone and developing the mobile phone itself. It's a human-centered design approach to innovation, which means that you're starting with the end user experience. This is where the empathy piece comes in. So by starting with the end user experience, you're not thinking reductively. You're not thinking, what do I have that I can sell to my customers? You're not thinking, what is the problem that I need to solve? You're thinking, what are the problems that exist in the world for my customer? But then already we need to start thinking more reductively, and we need to start saying, okay, well, there's all of these problems. We're not gonna build Rome in a day. So what are we going to focus on? This is when you define your innovation challenge question. This is where you're, in a sense, you define your innovation direction. And we develop what we call how might we questions. And it's a real simple formulation. You've gathered loads of insight from your customer in the empathy stage. And then you look at all of this and you say, okay, so there are some themes emerging, there are some challenges emerging. So then you say, right, okay, so how might we X, Y, Z? So for example, if we were working on a learning design, a leadership development program that we were co-designing with our client, we might find that actually we're starting really expansively. We haven't even defined who the target audience is going to be. We're looking at the whole organization. And then we find that actually there's a gap in capability at the mid-level management. So people who've got sort of, 6 or 7 direct reports, report into people who are a couple of levels down within the hierarchy of the organization. So already we can say, right, well, how might we develop a leadership program that builds the people management capability of mid-level managers in the organization? And we've gone from this very expansive to this more reductive thinking. But the great thing about this process is that it's a double funnel, because then when we come to ideas, when we come to stage 3, we need to be expansive again. We've got our challenge question, so we're operating within this golden circle that the challenge question has given us. But now we're able to think broadly, well, how might we do that? How might we? And we can be as expansive as we like. And that's great. And then when it comes to prototyping, we start to narrow down again and say, right, okay, so all of these ideas, we're going to try some of them out and see which ones work. So again, we're thinking reductively at this point. We're thinking, okay, so we've created a prototype, we're trying it out with people. We can see that one completely flopped. So we know that doesn't work. So we will discard that. And we're taking all of these different ideas that we're prototyping, reducing them down as we prototype and test until we've got the one idea that is going to work. And by building this innovation process into the engine, what we're doing is we're putting the end user at the heart of the process. We've got them at the empathy stage. We've got them at the prototyping and testing stage. So they bookend the process. They are there at the expansive part of the funnel. They're there at the reductive part of the funnel. And we are guaranteed to be solving the challenge that they're facing in a way that works for them. And we love this process, and I'm not ashamed to say that it is the structure that we at the Innovation Beehive would recommend. We think this absolutely works for just about any challenge that we have ever encountered. In fact, for every challenge we've encountered with our clients at the Innovation Beehive, it always works when it's done well. So that is the structure we would recommend.
Absolutely. And Joe, I'm reminded there that, as you described, being expansive and reductive at different stages, it's almost like the process breathes. However, it is, of course, constrained. And I'm reminded of Google's 9 notions of innovation. Number 7 is creativity loves constraint, which seems counterintuitive, but it absolutely works.
Absolutely, yeah. And just thinking about this process, it looks linear, doesn't it? But the reality is that it's not. At every point, you might need to go back and you might need to reconfigure. So you might need to look again, particularly as you come to prototyping and testing. Sometimes you'll find that actually the ideas that you've come up with aren't solving the problems that you thought you needed to solve. So you need to go back to your insight, back to the empathy stage, maybe define a different how might we question, come up with some more ideas, and try again. But the thing is, because you're operating in such a lean and agile way, often the prototypes that we come up with our clients cost nothing to produce, and they cost nothing to test. So you can do this at pace. You can do it quickly, you can do it cheaply, you can keep on trying until you hit the right point. But because it's not necessarily linear, it's really important to signal the kind of behaviors, and this is where the leadership comes in. It's really important to signal the kind of behaviors that you as a leader need to see from your team. So whether you're thinking expansively at this point or reductively at this point, people need to know, so that they're all on the same wavelength. The worst examples of innovation sessions that I've been in is when the leader has forgotten, or the facilitator has forgotten, to signal what kind of behavior we need at that moment, or doesn't call out the wrong behaviors when they see them. So signaling the right behavior is absolutely essential to delivering on to delivering the design thinking process, so that people can navigate their way through the maze effectively.
Joe, I love how you've kept that metaphor of the maze, and we've got the image of us following someone through the maze.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah. Great. So I just want to talk about, Zach talked about leading in habit, and I want to talk about a particular tool that we use with leaders when we're delivering leadership development programs, and it's a tool for decision making, and it's kind of for transparent decision making. So when we think about what people need from their leaders, transparent decision making enables trust, it enables stability, it enables credibility. And the key thing about this tool that you can see on the screen here, the OODA loop, is that it enables leaders to change direction, and it enables leaders to say, we were wrong, we're gonna change, we're gonna flip. And when you think about the design thinking process, when you think about prototyping and testing, in a good design thinking process, the vast majority of your ideas are going to be wrong. So what better way to signal to your organization and to your team that you are serious about innovation than by being transparent about your decision-making process and using something like the OODA loop to say, actually, the decision I made yesterday, we need to change that because it was wrong. It's no longer relevant. The great thing about the OODA loop is that the way that it's structured and the way the thinking process goes is that I'm not strictly right in saying we were wrong. Actually, the decision was right yesterday. It's no longer right today. That's the key thing. So for the OODA loop, in terms of your management style, the key thing is to think, first of all, you observe the world around you. You observe the context in which you're operating. You then orientate yourself according to what you've seen. You then make a decision and you act on that decision. But the action that you've taken may well change the situation in which you find yourself. So you need to observe again, you need to orientate again, you need to decide, and then you might need to take a different action. And then your action may change the world around you, or the world around you may have shifted and changed. So you need to observe, orientate, decide, act, etc. So it's a really powerful decision-making habit to build. And if you're transparent about this with your team, it's going to achieve two wins for you. One, in terms of general leadership, and giving people the credibility, showing people credibility, building people's trust, giving people stability. You may be changing all the time in terms of direction, small changes in what your team is doing. But the benefit of that is that people know why it's happening, because they know that the OODA loop is at play in the decision-making process, and you can bring them with you on the journey because you're being transparent in your decision-making. So that's one win. You become a more credible, transparent, and a leader who brings stability and hope to people. But the second win is that you are role modeling the desired behaviors that you want to see within the innovation process, within the innovation engine, because you are showing people that it is okay to say, this doesn't work and we need to change. And that is ultimately what you want people to be doing, particularly in the ideation, prototyping, and testing phase. It's a really powerful behavior to embed.
We've had a question, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
How to balance the tension between changing your mind and while still looking credible? Well, you can definitely change your mind as long as when you change your mind, you're still going in the same direction as part of the innovation ecosystem. If you have that unified direction and you change your mind within that, then that's fine, as long as it's taking you closer to reaching that direction. I think that works quite well.
Absolutely. And the other thing to say on that is, well, if you're changing your mind within the framework of design thinking or within the framework of the OODA loop,
Yeah.
well, people expect you to change your mind because you've been transparent with them that this is the decision-making process that you take. So you just need to share with people before the first time you change your mind that this may well happen, because you're recognizing the power of pivoting, the power of shifting perspective and shifting direction in a way that is delivering results. So as long as people know that you're working to this framework and to this set of behaviors, then you're going to bring people with you and have that credibility that is so important. And actually another comment has just come through that just in relation to the OODA loop and also prototyping and testing, presumably you would agree the criteria up front. Well, yes and no. So sometimes within design, and what I think the person who commented means is you would agree the criteria for a good idea before you start testing them. You may do that. It depends on the idea that on the challenge that you're facing. Sometimes you learn what your criteria needs to be as you develop ideas, as you prototype, and as you test. And sometimes having too many constraints, as in too much criteria, can become like a constraint on the ideation process if you have too many sets of criteria up front. So often when we're running projects, the first set of criteria that we will use is simply how much do people in the room like the idea? You know, because if your people aren't going to be energized by delivering something that's innovative, they're unlikely to deliver it. So often we use a Passionometer, which is simply sticky dots on the wall or heart shapes on a Miro board, or stars or rating scales or whatever mechanism you would use to just see what the feeling is in the room. And then you can build out, we often use spider diagrams to identify, which we call stargazing because they form a star shapes sometimes. You know, you can then put different criteria that you identify or that you've identified in advance to then measure the likelihood of success of the ideas that you generate. So long-winded answer to say, sometimes it's good to agree the criteria up front, sometimes it isn't, but the key thing is to identify and articulate whether you are or whether you're not upfront within the innovation process. Zach, did that make sense to you, what I just said then?
Yes, it did.
Good, that's a relief. If it made sense to you, I expect it made sense to other people.
Well, no, that person who made that comment's actually come in with a follow-up chat comment saying that, so it's basically reinforcing the importance of ongoing communication, which is absolutely key in a more complex project.
Yes.
Key in everything. But there's a number of things apart from communication which are key and will really help your engine to be finely tuned. Oh, look at us keeping that metaphor going. It's great. So where it says here a clear process, yes, a clear process, but I guess you could also put structure and criteria as well. But anything which gives it a clear sense of constraint and forward motion, then perfect. We've talked already about leading by example. You cannot, please don't just give your team an engine and say, your job, off you go. As a leader, we'll be so much stronger leading in heart if we can take our team with us by leading by example, and giving them permission to create, again, to overcome some of those automatic barriers that people do have. And one of the hardest things for any leader to get right, of course, is praise and recognition and giving continuous feedback. Now think about using the OODA loop in terms of feeding back continuously. So we observe, we orient ourselves, and then we can give feedback in a powerful way, perhaps using the OODA loop. I don't know if you think that would work, Joe, but it's quite an interesting idea.
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, praise and recognition generally, regardless of whether the idea they're coming up with is good or bad. You know, we need to encourage them to continue to have great ideas so we could praise and redirect. And internal and external collaboration, that one's particularly interesting. We have an example about it coming up shortly, but it's not just about perhaps having an engine from your internal teams. You can have an engine from pretty much anyone you want. Lots of companies use their customers, companies use other organizations as well, or consultants and so on.
And I guess the reason for that last point there, the internal and external collaboration, ultimately it loops back to expansive and reductive thinking. Yeah. The more external perspectives that you bring, the more expansive your thinking can be. We're actually running a workshop in a couple of weeks with a client, and they're bringing one of the agencies that they work with into the workshop as well. In fact, we're meeting in the agency's office. So we're taking people from our client into another space. And we're also working with a number of people from that agency, bringing in that external perspective, bringing in a different, fresh pair of eyes. And it's a really powerful way of becoming even more expansive in your thinking. It's a sort of a fuel for the innovation engine, really. Just out of interest for the people on the call here, I wonder, have you seen any examples of the things we've talked about so far, of whether it's an innovation process, whether it's great leadership to signal the kind of behaviors that you're looking for, or to signal the importance of changing minds and learning from failure, learning from prototypes and testing? Have you seen any examples in your organization or in other organizations that you might have worked in? So we've already had a comment come through, which is great. Seen engines such as idea generating competitions. Absolutely, they are a great way of kind of fueling the innovation engine. You set a challenge, which should be based on end user insights. So you set how might we question, and then people from across the organization can come up with ideas. So it's sort of crowdsourcing the ideas from across the organization. And then the important thing with idea generating competitions, which is often overlooked in my experience of working with companies who've tried idea generating competitions in the past, the thing that's often overlooked is the implementation part. So they often receive hundreds of great ideas, but when I actually talk to people in the business, they say, well, I didn't really hear anything afterwards and nothing really seemed to happen. So communicating with people who've submitted the ideas is crucial, but also making something happen with the ideas that are actually going to deliver is really important. But there's a great example there.
I can think of an example, Joe, which has just popped into my head. It's probably better not give the name. It's an international drinks organization that we had this downloadable design thinking course, and they essentially brought that on board with them and used that as a clear process, as a way of having a clear structure to work through with innovation.
Absolutely. And another great example has just come through, actually. So it's talking about the learning from failure. And I know if you Google the phrase Google Graveyard, you will find all of the ideas at Google, all of the products that have been beta launched that haven't worked. But actually what Google does is takes all the learning from those and then applies it to new ideas in the organization. It's the same with Amazon. The Amazon launched a phone years ago. I don't think very few of us on the call probably even knew that. I had a vague notion of it. But anyway, that didn't work. And all of the technology, or huge amounts of the technology that went into the Amazon phone, were then used to build Alexa, which is one of Amazon's most successful products. And we've had another comment come through: how do we make sure ideas get properly explored, not just those that come from the loudest or most popular voices? That's a really interesting question. It actually ties into a challenge that we're working on at the moment with one of our clients, is how do you tease out the quieter voices? Because we've actually had some feedback from our workshops in the past that says, well, this is all very well if you're an extrovert, you're going to love a workshop like this, but I'm a finance person. I'm not interested in, bean bags and post-it notes and the like. And I was really disappointed with that feedback when I received it, because I thought if you do what we're saying you should do, there is a place for everybody within the innovation process. There are just different peaks at different points for different personality types and different ways of thinking. If you're a people person, you're going to love the empathy stage, where you're gathering insight from end users, where you're exploring qualitative insight and qualitative data points, as well as quantitative, to understand the unmet needs of your end user. And you're going to love the idea generating part, where you're working with people, collaborating to think really expansively. But then
I think sorry, Joe, I think it's even bigger than that, because then if you have set a great innovation direction, if you have created a wonderful innovation environment and got everyone bought into that, firstly, they're going to be more passionate about the ideas they're going to be talking about. So then it comes down to exactly what this person has said about how do you bring their voices out, which is certainly in my experience of facilitating sessions, really comes down to how the facilitator signals clearly how they're going to move through the engine to bring the right voices out.
Absolutely, because as you move through that engine, you then get to the prototyping and testing stage where actually you are becoming more reductive and you're beginning to think, well, how can I make this work, right? So you're thinking, how can I make this happen? How can I deliver this? Which then appeals to a different type of person and a different personality type, different way of thinking. But ultimately, sometimes there will be people who are not forthcoming in their views. They generally we've got a colleague who we work with sometimes. She calls herself a psychologist. She particularly works with people who are shy. And those people often don't come forward, don't put themselves forward. And this is where leadership comes in. You know, as Zach was saying, the importance of signaling, the importance of encouraging people to come forward. Well, sometimes part of your role as a leader might be to go directly to the quieter people in your team or to the quieter people in your organization. Ask them to sit down with you one-to-one and share their perspective, share their ideas. You know, that's a great trait as a leader. If you're doing that, you're absolutely leading in heart. You're leading with compassion. You're creating a sense of trust with that person on a one-to-one basis, because not everybody is going to speak in a group session. So great question. Thank you. What have we got next, Zach? Oh yes, what can I do as a leader? And I'll let you speak on this because it's you.
Well, we've actually covered pretty much everything that I
I
had in mind already, which is great. However, we can turn this into a reflective piece. So whether you're listening to this on the podcast or you're watching it on YouTube or you're here with us right now we have a brief opportunity just to consider a couple of questions about our own organizations. So Joe, if we could flip on to the next. Couple of quick headlines and then some 3 thinking questions for you. The first thing is that we haven't talked much, but we will, about metrics. How are we going to measure the success of innovation using an engine? The second part is that there are several different structures that businesses can put into place to bring new ideas into the business. That could be, as we've talked about, external collaboration or design thinking or lean or whatever it might be. The third thing is that partnering specifically with external talent can invigorate your corporate culture, can really sort of bring to life a new way of looking at things and re-inspire those plateaued employees. And if we do it right, it might even pair people up, for example. It might even bring those shy people a little bit more forwards. So some things to consider. Firstly, how do I take ownership for innovation? So think about how you do that as a leader. Do I know what successful innovation looks like? How do we judge it? Do you actually have that defined right now in your organization? Do I look outside for fresh ideas and perspectives? Everything we see at any moment could be stimulus to help move our creativity forwards for our team. If you can answer those, great. But if you can't, time to consider them. Joe.
Great, thank you, Zach. So we're just going to share a couple of quick examples to illustrate a couple of points that have been drawn out in the webinar, and particularly on that last slide. There's one in particular I want to share with you, and then Zach will share one from a current client that we have. So on the bottom left there, you can see a fairly potentially bland looking visual, but actually what that is a really powerful way of measuring the impact of innovation. And, when we think again about what people need from their leaders, one of the things that you need is hope and credibility. And one of the most challenging things to demonstrate is the impact of innovation efforts. You might have 100 ideas that go through the process, and one of them is successful. And sometimes none of them are successful in actually becoming implemented. And that's not through a poor process. That's because you found that 99 ideas didn't work, didn't quite solve the problem. But actually that is a success. And what we developed is a strategic impact model for measuring the effectiveness of learning and development and also of innovation. And what you do is you look at it in 4 stages. You look at what is the input. So for example, in the context of, let's take an idea generating scheme where you seek to gather ideas from across the organization. So the input would be, great, we had, we did a training course, we set up a system which would then receive ideas, and then those would go to a panel. That panel would then decide which ones are taken forward to implementation, etc. The immediate impact of the structure that we put in place is we've generated 1,000 ideas from across the organization, 10 of which have been taken forward for implementation. The operational impact would be that actually those 10 ideas have been rolled out. they've been effective in delivering value for the organization, financial or otherwise. And then the strategic impact is really the business goal that you're seeking to hit. So this is your innovation direction, if you like. So, in the case of the example on screen, it's driving revenue. So you might want to drive revenue. You might want to improve employee engagement. You might want to improve recruitment and retention. You might want to increase customer service scores. So the key thing is that you have your strategic impact, and you have these operational impacts, the immediate impact, and ultimately the input. So you can draw a clear line of sight from the input and the efforts that you're putting into the innovation process through to the strategic impact. But it's more than just the number of ideas that are taken forward to implementation. And it's more than just the number of ideas that are generated. You can get really creative in thinking about what metrics you can measure to deliver, to demonstrate the strategic impact that your idea generating and your innovation engine has had. So just quick, it was one idea for measuring the impact of innovation. And there's actually a white paper on our website about how to measure innovation. If you're interested in exploring that further, feel free to download that. It's completely free to download on our website, innovationbeehive.com. Zach, do you want to talk about SSE? I think we'll, the Barclays one, we can, if you download the white paper on the innovation ecosystem, you can find a bit more info on the Barclays example.
Right, Joe. So I'm going to combine design thinking and SSE together. Now, SSE is a large energy company in the UK that we've worked with quite a lot. They wanted to find a creative way to immerse themselves in the world of their customer whilst keeping still some structure to develop a new product. Now, we led their propositions team that create new products on a week-long design thinking course, totally immersed for an entire week, and then certified them to use design thinking. And then several months later, they were using design thinking for various products, but then they used it to create a significant and entirely new green product for them called Go Green. And it's turned out to be one of their most successful products to date because they absorbed that process as their engine.
It's a really great example of how actually when you build a structure, good things happen. We did a 5-day workshop in 2019, and we're still talking to the guys who are on that workshop, and they're still using the same process, and it's completely baked into the way they do things at SSE. It's a fantastic example. Great. So a few questions for you to consider as leaders of your team or of your organization. So this is really relating the innovation engine to the behaviors and mindset and ways of working of great leaders. So thinking about leading in head, think about the structures and processes that you need in place to take ideas from inception to implementation. We've shared our recommended approach on the webinar today, design thinking. It absolutely works. It puts the end user front and center, front and end, either end of the process. And that ties into leading in heart. What behaviors do I need to adopt to fuel innovation in my organization and team? Well, the behavior that you need is expansive at the right time, reductive at the right time, and the ability to signal when you need to be expansive and when you need to be reductive. And alongside that, of course, there's the behaviors around empathy and showing care and consideration and positivity towards ideas that emerge. But fundamentally, thinking in terms of expansive and reductive thinking and signaling which behaviors you need at which time will transform your innovation efforts. Leading in health, how can I ensure my team have the resilience they need to see through their ideas to action? So this is really about tying in with the environment of psychological safety, which I know Zach and Angela talked about on the previous webinar. This is really about ensuring that people have the ability to keep going, because when you get into the design thinking process, particularly around prototyping and testing, it can get a little bit like a maze. You have multiple prototypes running at the same time. You keep on getting knockbacks when you realize that this doesn't work or that doesn't work. All of these things in reality are a positive, and you can lead in health by helping your team to see that every failure or perception of failure is actually a success because you're learning something at every point. Leading in habit is about signaling. So what signals does my behavior? So this is one for reflection. What signals does my behavior send to my team? So the way that I currently operate in my day-to-day when we're not necessarily thinking about innovation, am I actually, through that behavior, encouraging innovation? you know, there's that classic cliched statistic that, you know, you can have 10 positive interactions and 1 negative, and it undoes all of the positive interactions, the feeling of those. It's the same with leading in habit. You need to be consistent in your approach and not suddenly switch into innovation mode. Actually, as a leader, if you can be transparent and credible and be trusted by your people, you're going to be a natural innovation leader, but that requires habit and consistency. And then how can I signal that I want them to focus on innovation? Well, one recommendation we've made for that is to use the OODA loop as part of your decision making and be transparent in it, and draw the specific connection between your use of the OODA loop and the design thinking process for prototyping and testing. And finally, leading in history, how can I ensure the structures I build into the innovation engine are fit for the long term? So this isn't something that we've dwelt on in this webinar, but actually, you know, you've got an opportunity as you seek to build an innovation ecosystem in your organization. You've got an opportunity to create something that is sustainable for the long term. If you build rigorous processes, as we do with our clients, then you know that as people leave your team, and ultimately if you move on to another role, your team will still be able to operate with an innovation ecosystem in place, because they will have this robust structure which has a clear process, a clear methodology, and a clear set of behaviors which will be held by the whole team rather than just held by you. So there are some questions to consider, and just a big thank you from me to Zach for your sharing an insight on the webinar today, and thanks to everyone who added their comments when we had questions, and thanks for joining. Now, I know a couple of you on this call are registered for our next webinar. Unfortunately, we're going to have to change the date for that. I'll email everyone who's already registered, but do look out for an email with a registration link if you haven't already registered for it. It's going to be on the 21st of September, 11 a.m. And that's going to be about the enablers within the innovation ecosystem, enabling your people to innovate. So how do we build the capability of our people to think creatively and to operate within the engine that we've created, and to ultimately deliver real impact through their creativity and innovation efforts. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Joe.
Have a great week, everybody.